A proud Viking warrior is forced to wed a mud-covered, seemingly hideous bride as payment for a blood debt, only to discover that her rough appearance conceals not just unexpected beauty, but the fierce heart of a shield maiden. In the harsh fjords of the north, where strength determines survival, most see only a burden in this strange woman. But as raids threaten their settlement, her hidden skills become their salvation. This is a story about seeing beyond deception to the true warrior within, and how honor is measured not by appearance, but by the courage to face one's enemies, both on the battlefield and at the hearth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this tale of Viking courage speaks to your heart. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved an epic saga of betrayal and redemption that will leave you breathless. The bitter wind howled across the fjord, carrying with it the sting of salt and the promise of an early winter. Ragnar Ironhand stood at the prow of his longship, his weathered face expressionless as he watched the coastline of his homeland emerge through the morning mist. His knuckles whitened around the carved dragon figurehead as the familiar peaks of the Vestfjord Mountains rose before him, their snow-capped summits piercing the low-hanging clouds like the spears of fallen warriors in Valhalla. At 37, Winters, Ragnar was well past the age when most Viking men had established their legacies. Sons to carry their names, wealth to ensure their place in the sagas, and the respect of their kinsmen to guarantee their honor in this life, and the eye. Next, but fate, that cruel weaver of destinies, had dealt him a different hand. The raid on the Frankish monastery that should have sealed his glory had instead left him with a shattered reputation, half his men dead, and a blood debt that could only be paid through the most humiliating of arrangements. Odin gefur og Odin tekur, he muttered to himself. Odin gives and Odin takes away. The old saying had become his shield against despair in the months since his defeat. Behind him, 20 warriors manned the oars of the sleek vessel, their rhythmic strokes pushing against the choppy waters of the fjord. These men, the remnants of his once mighty warband, followed him still, though their eyes no longer held the unquestioning loyalty of earlier days. How could they, when he was returning not with glory and plunder, but with shame and a bride he had never seen, the price of peace with the clan whose warriors he had accidentally slain? Land approaches Ragnar, called Halfdan, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor. The burly warrior moved to stand beside him, his red beard now streaked with gray after 25 years of raiding. Are you prepared for what awaits? Ragnar's jaw tightened beneath his own thick beard. Does a man prepare for hell while still living? I am as ready as one can be to wed the daughter of Sigurd One-Eye. Halfdan's expression remained carefully neutral. They say she is unusual. They say she is hideous, Ragnar corrected bluntly. A face that would make a troll weep with pity, a body misshapen as a frost giant's dream, and the temperament of a wounded bear. This is what comes of killing Sigurd's sons, even if it was in the fog of battle with no way to know whose men we faced. A blood price must be paid, Halfdan agreed solemnly. But perhaps the rumors exaggerate. Few have actually seen Sigurd's daughter. She has been kept hidden away in his northern holdings. Hidden for good reason, I'd wager, Ragnar replied bitterly. Why else would Sigurd One-Eye, with all his wealth and power, offer his only daughter to the man who killed his sons? Because no other would have her, that's why. And now I, who once had my choice of any woman from Dublin to Miklagard, must take as wife a creature so foul even her father keeps her from sight. The ship's bow sliced through the increasingly shallow waters as they approached the settlement of Ravnfjord, Ragnar's ancestral home. Smoke rose from the cluster of longhouses nestled between the steep mountainsides and the protected harbor. In better times, Ragnar would have felt pride at returning to the land his grandfather had claimed. 2 generations ago, now he felt only the weight of failure. As the longship neared the stone jetty, figures appeared along the shoreline. The people of Ravnfjord had gathered to witness their chieftain's return, and to see the woman who would become their mistress. Ragnar could read the curiosity in their stances, the barely concealed anticipation of scandal. News traveled fast along the fjords. Everyone knew of the disastrous raid and the humiliating terms of reconciliation. "They await a spectacle," Ragnar muttered. "Then give them leadership instead," Halfdan advised. "Show them the face of a man who honors his word, no matter the cost. That is what they need to see." Ragnar nodded grimly, straightening his broad shoulders beneath his bearskin cloak. The silver arm rings that marked his status caught the weak sunlight as he raised a hand in greeting to his people. Whatever his private thoughts, he would not show weakness before them. The longship scraped against the jetty, and his men secured it with practiced efficiency. Ragnar leapt ashore, acknowledging the respectful nods of his people with a raised hand. His brother Bjorn approached, clasping Ragnar's forearm in the traditional warrior's greeting. "Welcome home, brother," Bjorn said, his eyes searching Ragnar's face. At 33, Bjorn was the spitting image of Ragnar, save for the scar that split his left eyebrow, a souvenir from their first raid together. "The hall is prepared for your return." Ragnar caught the hesitation. "Speak plainly, Bjorn. What news?" "Sigurd One-Eye arrived yesterday with his daughter and 10 of his warriors. They await you in the great hall." Bjorn lowered his voice. "Ragnar, the woman. The rumors do not do justice to her appearance." A cold weight settled in Ragnar's stomach. "That bad?" "Worse," Bjorn confirmed. "She arrived covered in mud and filth, as though she had rolled in a pig pen before mounting her horse. Her hair is a tangled nest that has never known a comb. She speaks to no one, eats with her hands like an animal, and glares at any who approach. Sigurd's men keep their distance, and even her father seems reluctant to acknowledge her." Ragnar closed his eyes briefly, invoking Odin's strength. This was the price of his failure, to be forever bound to a creature who would bring shame rather than honor to his household. "She will be my wife by sunset," he said flatly. "Such is the blood price. I will not break my oath no matter how bitter the cup I must drink from." Together, the brothers walked up the well-worn path from the harbor to the settlement proper. People parted before them, offering tentative greetings that Ragnar acknowledged with curt nods. He could read the pity in their eyes, and it burned, worse than any battle wound he had ever suffered. The great hall of Ravnfjord stood at the center of the settlement, its timber walls rising impressively against the backdrop of the mountains. Carved dragons adorned the roof beams, their wooden eyes seeming to follow Ragnar's approach. This should have been a moment of triumph, a chieftain returning to his hall with new wealth and glory. Instead, it felt like a funeral procession. The massive oak doors. Ragnar paused, drawing a deep breath. "Wait here," he instructed Halfdan and the others. "I would meet my bride without an audience for this first encounter." Bjorn gripped his shoulder. "Courage, brother. You have faced death in a dozen battles. Surely you can face one woman, no matter how fearsome." Ragnar pushed open the heavy doors and strode into the dimly lit hall. The central hearthfire cast long shadows across the rush-strewn floor, illuminating the high seat at the far end. There sat Sigurd One-Eye, a massive man with a leather patch covering his missing right eye, his gray-streaked beard falling to the middle of his chest. Beside him stood his warriors, hands resting meaningfully on their sword hilts, and at Sigurd's left hand crouched a figure that made Ragnar's steps falter momentarily. Even prepared by Bjorn's warning, the sight shocked him. The woman, if indeed it was a woman beneath the matted hair and layer of filth, sat hunched on a low stool, wrapped in a rough woolen cloak that might once have been blue but was now a patchwork of stains and tears. Her face was almost entirely obscured by mud and a wild tangle of dark hair, through which one eye gleamed with surprising intensity. Where her features could be discerned at all, They seemed twisted in a permanent scowl. Ragnar Ironhand, Sigurd's voice boomed across the hall. You return at last to fulfill your blood oath. Ragnar forced himself forward, his face a careful mask of neutrality. I have never broken my word, Sigurd One-Eye. Though your sons died by my blade, it was an honest battle, with no way to know they were kinsmen in the fog and chaos. Yet dead, they remain, Sigurd replied coldly. 2 sons I have lost while you still live. The gods are seldom fair in their dealings. The gods give as they will, Ragnar agreed, stopping before the high seat. I have come to pay the blood price we agreed upon, peace between our clans sealed by marriage. Sigurd's single eye gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps malice. Indeed, meet Fridas, my only daughter. At her name, the hunched figure lifted her head slightly. Through the curtain of filthy hair, Ragnar caught a clearer glimpse of that one visible eye, dark as a midwinter night and filled with what seemed like smoldering resentment. Rise, daughter, Sigurd commanded. Greet the man who will be your husband before the sun sets. Slowly, with movements that seemed deliberately graceless, the woman stood. She was tall for a woman, though still a head shorter than Ragnar's imposing height. The shapeless garments she wore gave no hint of her true form, though her shoulders seemed unusually broad beneath the ragged cloak. Ragnar Ironhand, she said, her voice surprisingly clear and low for one so seemingly misshapen. So you are the mighty warrior who slays men in fog. I expected someone taller. A surprised murmur ran through Sigurd's men. The disrespect in her tone was unmistakable. Ragnar felt a flush of anger rise in his chest, but mastered it quickly. This was a test. Whether from the woman or her father, he could not tell. And I, he replied evenly, expected the daughter of a great jarl to present herself with the dignity befitting her station. It seems we are both disappointed. For a moment he thought he caught a flash of something, amusement, respect, in that visible eye, but it vanished so quickly. He might have imagined it. Sigurd slapped his knee with a laugh that held no humor. Already you quarrel like true husband and wife. The match is well made. He rose from the high seat, towering nearly as tall as Ragnar himself. The terms are simple, Ragnar Ironhand. You will wed my daughter before sunset, making her mistress of your hall and lands. You will treat her as befits a jarl's daughter with all honor and respect. In return, the blood debt for my sons is paid, and there shall be peace between our clans for as long as she lives as your wife. And if she should die? Ragnar asked, unable to keep a trace of hope from his voice. Sigurd's single eye narrowed dangerously. Then the debt returns, with interest. Choose how you guard her life accordingly. Ragnar understood the implicit threat. This unwanted bride was now his responsibility, and her well-being would determine whether peace endured or war resumed. Whatever his personal feelings, he could not allow harm to come to her. His people had suffered enough from the feud already. I accept these terms, Ragnar said formally. Let the preparations for the wedding begin. I would have this done properly with all due ceremony. Good, Sigurd nodded. My daughter requires time to prepare herself for the wedding. I trust you can provide a woman to assist her? Ragnar thought quickly. My sister-in-law Astrid will attend her. Bjorn's wife was known for her patience and kind heart, qualities that would be sorely tested by this task, he suspected. Then it is settled, Sigurd declared. By sunset, our clans will be joined, and the blood price paid. He turned to his daughter. Fridas, go with Astrid when she comes. Make yourself presentable for your wedding. The woman, Fridas, made no reply, but inclined her head in what might have been agreement or merely submission. Ragnar found himself wondering what thoughts moved behind that mud-caked face. Was she as reluctant as he, or did she view this arrangement as an opportunity to escape her father's hall? As if sensing his scrutiny, Fridas raised her head and met his gaze directly. For a brief instant, their eyes locked, and Ragnar felt an unexpected jolt of something. Not attraction. Gods, no. But recognition, perhaps. There was intelligence in that dark gaze, and a hardness that spoke of survival against difficult odds. Then she lowered her eyes, resuming her hunched posture of apparent submission. Ragnar turned to leave, eager to escape the stifling atmosphere of the hall and the prospect of his impending marriage. As he reached the door, Sigurd called after, "Him! Ragnar Ironhand." He paused, looking back. "You think yourself sorely used by the gods in this bargain," Sigurd said, his voice carrying a strange tone that might have been amusement. "Perhaps you are, or perhaps you receive more than you know. The Norns weave as they will, and none of us can see the full pattern of the tapestry until it is complete." The cryptic statement lingered in Ragnar's mind as he stepped back into the pale sunlight. Halfdan and Bjorn awaited him, their expressions eager for news. "It is as you said," Ragnar told his brother grimly. "The woman appears more beast than human, but the terms are set, and I will honor them. Send Astrid to attend her, though warn your wife what she faces." He turned to Halfdan. "See that the hall is prepared for a wedding feast. A poor one, perhaps, given our diminished fortunes, but I will not have it said that Ragnar Ironhand failed in hospitality, even on such a day as this." As his men dispersed to carry out his orders, Ragnar found himself alone for the first time since landing. He walked to the edge of the settlement, where the ground fell away steeply to the fjord below. The longship that had carried him home now seemed like a fragile toy against the vastness of the water. Once, he had been free as that ship, able to chart his own course, to raid and trade as he chose. Now he was bound by oath to a woman who seemed more troll than human, his future chained to a blood price he could not escape without bringing destruction upon his people. "Give me strength, All-Father," he murmured to the sky, where Odin was said to watch the struggles of mortal men with his ravens Hugin and Munin perched upon his shoulders. "Let me face this fate with the courage worthy of a place in your hall when my time comes." No answer came from the cloud-strewn heavens, but as Ragnar turned back toward the settlement, a raven called sharply from a nearby pine. In Norse belief, the sound could be an omen, though whether good or ill remained to be seen. The hours before sunset passed with agonizing slowness. Ragnar bathed and dressed in his finest clothing, a tunic of deep blue wool, embroidered at the neck, and cuffs with intricate knotwork, leggings of good linen, and his ceremonial cloak fastened with a silver brooch shaped like Thor's hammer. Around his upper arms, he placed the silver rings that marked his status as chieftain. His beard was combed and oiled, his hair, still mostly dark despite threads of gray at the temples, neatly braided in the warrior's style. If he must face humiliation, he would do so looking every inch the jarl and war leader he had once been. The great hall had been transformed in his absence. Fresh rushes covered the floor, strewn with sweet herbs to combat the usual odors of a Viking dwelling. Every available lamp and torch had been lit, bathing the space in golden light. Trestle tables lined the walls, laden with the best food that could be prepared on short notice: smoked fish, fresh bread, roasted meats, and kegs of ale and mead. His people filed in, dressed in their finest clothes, their faces showing a mixture of sympathy for their chieftain and curiosity about his bizarre bride. Ragnar took his place before the central hearth, where the ceremony would be performed according to ancient custom. Bjorn approached, looking uncomfortable. "Astrid has done what she could with your bride," he said quietly. "Though she says it was like trying to bathe a wild cat. The woman fought every attempt to clean her properly." Ragnar's heart sank further. "Is there no end to this humiliation?" "Courage, brother," Bjorn repeated his earlier encouragement. "One day we will laugh. about this over ale in Valhalla. If the Valkyries don't mistake my bride for a draugr and flee in terror, Ragnar muttered darkly. Further conversation ceased as Sigurd One-Eye entered the hall with his warriors. The massive Jarl had also dressed for the occasion, wearing a Tisau cloak of bear fur over a richly embroidered tunic, with gold arm rings and a sword whose hilt gleamed with inlaid silver. "Where is your daughter?" Ragnar asked, looking past him for the hunched, filthy figure he had met earlier. A strange smile crossed Sigurd's face. "She comes. The women are finishing her preparations." The hall had filled completely now, with Ragnar's people lining one side and Sigurd's warriors the other. The village Godi, the priest who would perform the ceremony, stepped forward, his white beard reaching almost to his waist, the sacred arm ring of Thor gleaming on his forearm. "We gather in the sight of the gods," the old man began, his voice surprisingly strong for one of his years, "to witness the joining of two bloodlines, the healing of a breach, the payment of a debt." At that moment, the side door to the hall opened, and Astrid entered, her face flushed with what might have been exertion or annoyance. She turned and beckoned to someone just outside the door. "Come," she said firmly. "It is time." The assembled crowd held its collective breath as a figure stepped through the doorway. Ragnar blinked, certain he must be mistaken. This could not be the same woman he had met earlier. The creature that had crouched beside Sigurd had been a filthy, hunched thing of indeterminate features and snarling disposition. The woman who now stood at the threshold of the hall was tall and straight-backed, with the proud bearing of a shield maiden rather than the cowering posture of a mistreated daughter. Her hair, freed from mud and tangles, fell in a thick, dark braid over one shoulder, adorned with silver beads that caught the firelight. Her face, now clean, revealed features that were striking if not conventionally beautiful. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and a determined chin that spoke of strong will. But it was her eyes that transfixed Ragnar, dark as the night sea, and just as fathomless, regarding him with a directness that few men, let alone women, would dare. She wore a simple but elegant gown of deep green, belted with silver links, over which she had draped a ceremonial shawl pinned with brooches that marked her as a Jarl's daughter. The hall had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on this transformation. Ragnar's mouth had gone dry, his mind struggling to reconcile the mud-covered creature of the morning with this regal woman approaching the hearth. As she drew near, close enough that he could catch the scent of the herbs used to wash her hair, she offered the faintest of smiles, though whether in greeting or triumph, he could not tell. "Ragnar Ironhand," she said, in that same clear, low voice he remembered from their first meeting. "I am ready to fulfill my father's bargain. Are you?" And in that moment, as confusion gave way to the first stirrings of anger at having been so thoroughly deceived, Ragnar realized that this marriage would be nothing like the humiliating burden he had anticipated. It would be something far more dangerous. Ragnar stood frozen, his mind racing to understand the deception that had unfolded before him and his entire clan. The transformation from mud-caked creature to striking woman left him speechless, anger and confusion battling within his chest. The assembled guests murmured among themselves, their earlier pity transforming to fascination as they beheld Freydis, in her true form. "You seem surprised, Ragnar Ironhand," Freydis said, her voice carrying just far enough for him to hear. "Did you expect me to remain in filth for our wedding night as well?" The implied challenge in her words snapped him from his stupor. "I expected honesty," he replied in equally hushed tones, "not trickery and disguise. What game do you play, daughter of Sigurd?" Before she could answer, the Godi raised his gnarled hands for silence. "The gods look upon this union," he intoned. "Let all witness the joining of these two bloodlines under the eyes of Odin Allfather, who sees all truths and binds all oaths." The irony of invoking truth in this ceremony was not lost on Ragnar. He glanced at Sigurd One-Eye, expecting to see triumph or mockery on the Jarl's face. But the older man's expression was unreadable, his single eye fixed on his daughter with what might have been pride? Concern? Ragnar could not tell. The ritual proceeded according to ancient custom. Swords were exchanged, Ragnar presenting Freydis with an ancestral blade that had belonged to his mother, while she offered him a weapon of surprising quality, its hilt wrapped in leather and set with amber. Rings were placed on fingers, promises spoken, and finally, the Godi bound their hands together with a sacred cord of red wool. As this cord binds your hands, so does your oath bind your lives, the old priest declared. From this day forward, your fates are woven together in the sight of gods and men. Through it all, Ragnar performed his part mechanically, his mind still struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the creature he had prepared himself to wed. When the moment came to seal their union with a kiss, he hesitated. Freydis met, his gaze, a challenge glinting in her dark eyes. "Does the mighty Ragnar Ironhand fear a woman's touch?" she whispered. Pride pushed him forward. The kiss was brief, formal, a mere brushing of lips. Yet Ragnar was startled by the warmth he found there, so at odds with the cold calculation he had glimpsed in her eyes. He drew back quickly, unsettled by his reaction. "It is done," announced the Godi. Before gods and men, these two are now bound as husband and wife. A cheer went up from the assembled guests, more enthusiastic now that the bride had proven to be something other than the troll woman they had expected. Horns of mead were raised in toast, and the wedding feast began in earnest, the earlier tension giving way to the familiar rhythms of celebration. Ragnar found himself seated in the high seat with Freydis beside him, accepting congratulations from his people while watching her from the corner of his eye. She played the role of noble bride with surprising skill, accepting tribute with gracious nods, speaking softly but confidently when addressed. No trace remained of the snarling, hunched creature that had first arrived in his hall. "You're staring," she observed, not turning to look at him as she accepted a horn of mead from a serving woman. "I'm trying to determine which is the disguise," Ragnar replied. "The mud-covered beast or this performance of a Jarl's daughter." A faint smile touched her lips. "Perhaps neither. Perhaps both. I dislike riddles almost as much as I dislike deception," he said flatly. "Yet you've bound yourself to both today," she countered, finally turning to face him directly. "You should know, husband, that I had no more choice in this match than you did. My father decreed it, and so it came to pass. But while you had the luxury of bemoaning your fate to sympathetic friends, I had only my wits and whatever small advantages I could create for myself. And appearing as a filthy, misshapen creature was to your advantage how?" Ragnar demanded. Freydis took a measured sip of mead before answering. "Men see what they expect to see, Ragnar Ironhand. My father told you. I was hideous, and so you expected a monster. When you beheld one, you never thought to look deeper. It allowed me to observe you in your natural state, without the mask men wear when trying to impress or intimidate a woman they might desire." The calculated nature of her deception only fueled Ragnar's anger. "And what did your observation reveal? Wife? That you are proud, but not cruel. That you honor your oaths even when they bring you pain. That your people respect you, though that respect has been tested by recent events." She held his gaze steadily. "That you expected to endure a lifetime with a woman you believed repulsive, rather than break your word and bring more suffering to your people. These are not worthless qualities in a husband." Before Ragnar could respond to this unexpected assessment, Sigurd One-Eye approached their table, his massive frame swaying slightly from the effects of strong mead. "So, Ragnar Ironhand," the older Jarl boomed, drawing the attention of those nearby. "What think you of my daughter now? Was she worth the blood price?" The hall quieted, guests leaning forward to catch Ragnar's response to this dangerous question. One wrong word could rekindle the feud they had gathered to settle. Ragnar felt Freydis tense beside him, though her face remained composed. He chose his words with care. "Your daughter is clearly more than she first appeared, Sigurd One-Eye," he replied evenly. "As to her worth, that remains to be proven, as does mine to her. A marriage is not made in a single day, nor is its value measured at its beginning." Sigurd threw back his head and laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Diplomatically spoken, my daughter will test that famous patience of yours, Ironhand. She has the stubbornness of her mother and the temper of 10 warriors." His single eye shifted to Freydis. "Guard your secrets well, daughter. Your new husband might not appreciate all you bring to his hall." The cryptic warning hung in the air as Sigurd moved away, rejoining his men in enthusiastic drinking. Ragnar turned to question Freydis about her father's words, but was interrupted by Halfdan, who approached with a group of warriors eager to toast their chieftain's marriage. The feast continued late into the night, with skaldic poems recited. In honor of the couple, boisterous drinking games and increasingly bawdy advice shouted to the groom. Through it all, Freydis maintained her dignified composure, though Ragnar noticed her watching the proceedings with the sharp attention of one memorizing faces and alliances. When at last tradition demanded they retire to the marriage bed, Ragnar found himself oddly reluctant. The familiar ritual unfolded, male guests escorting the groom with ribald jokes, women leading the bride away to prepare her, the ceremonial disrobing and witnessing of the couple entering the bedchamber together. Once the door closed behind them, leaving them alone in the small room lit only by a single oil lamp, the pretense of marital harmony fell away. Ragnar crossed to the far side of the chamber, putting distance between them. "I won't force you," he said bluntly. "Whatever game your father plays, whatever deception you've practiced, I am not a man who takes unwilling women." Freydis stood by the bed, still fully clothed despite the ceremonial disrobing that was supposed to have taken place. In the dim light, her expression was difficult to read. "And if I were willing?" she asked, her voice neutral. Ragnar laughed without humor. "After you presented yourself as a beast to test me? After you played me for a fool before my entire clan?" "I think not, Freydis Sigurd's daughter. You may share my name and my hall, but you will not share my bed. Not until I know what truly stands before me, ally or enemy." She considered this, head tilted slightly. A reasonable position, given the circumstances. And what of the witnesses who expect to hear evidence of consummation? Your men are still drinking outside that door, waiting for proof that their chieftain has claimed his bride. Ragnar had not considered this complication. Among their people, an unconsummated marriage could be more easily dissolved. A fact that might give Sigurd cause to claim the blood debt remained unpaid. Freydis seemed to read his thoughts. "Fear not, husband. I have no more desire to reignite the feud than you do." With that, she moved to the bed and began vigorously shaking the frame, creating a rhythmic creaking that echoed in the small chamber. After a moment, she added soft gasps and moans that grew in intensity. Ragnar stared, caught between disbelief and reluctant admiration for her pragmatic solution. The sounds she produced were convincingly passionate, rising to a final cry before she fell silent, breathing hard from the exertion of her performance. Outside, he heard the appreciative whoops and laughter of his men, followed by the sound of them moving away, satisfied that their chieftain had done his duty. "You've had practice at deception," Ragnar observed coldly when they were truly alone. Freydis shrugged, straightening her clothing where it had become disheveled during her act. "I've had practice at survival in a world that offers women few choices. Much like yourself, Ragnar Ironhand, you've done what necessity demanded, not what you might have chosen freely." She moved to the small chest that contained her belongings, withdrawing a thick woolen sleeping tunic. Without apparent concern for his presence, she began to change, turning her back as she removed her dress. Ragnar meant to look away, to grant her privacy despite his anger, but a movement caught his eye. As the dress fell away from her shoulders, he glimpsed something unexpected. A pattern of scars across her upper back, old and silvery in the lamplight. Not the kind that came from a father's disciplinary rod or a husband's fury, but the organized marks of battle, the sort that warriors carried. She turned, catching his gaze before he could avert it. The sleeping tunic covered her from neck to ankle, revealing nothing but her intent scrutiny of his reaction. "Yes," she said simply. "I have scars. Do they discuss the mighty Ragnar as much as the mud did?" "Those are battle marks," he stated, rather than asked. "How does a jarl's hidden daughter come by warrior's scars?" A guarded expression settled over her features. "We all fight our own battles, Ragnar Ironhand. Some with sword and axe, others with whatever weapons are permitted to us." She moved to the far side of the bed, creating a boundary between them. "I will keep to my side, and you to yours. Tomorrow begins our life together, whether we wish it or not. Better to face it with some rest." Ragnar wanted to press for answers, to demand the truth behind her scars and her deception, but exhaustion suddenly weighed upon him. The day had drained him mentally and emotionally, leaving him ill-equipped to unravel the mystery that was his new wife. "Tomorrow," he agreed, "you will tell me who and what you truly are, Freydis. No more deceptions." She regarded him steadily across the expanse of the bed. "I will tell you what you need to know to maintain our bargain. Beyond that, trust must be earned by both of us." With that, she lay down atop the furs, her back to him, seemingly unconcerned about making herself vulnerable to a man she barely knew. Ragnar hesitated, then removed his tunic and boots, keeping his trousers on as he settled as far from her as the bed would allow. Sleep came slowly, his mind turning over the day's events like a smith examining an unfamiliar piece of metal, testing its strength and searching for flaws. Something about this arrangement felt wrong, not just the deception of Freydis's appearance, but the entire bargain. Why would Sigurd, a powerful jarl with many allies, agree to end a blood feud over his son's deaths with mere marriage? And why to Ragnar specifically, whose fortunes had fallen so dramatically? There were deeper currents here that he could not yet discern. Beside him, Freydis's breathing had settled into the even rhythm of sleep, or a convincing imitation of it. Ragnar studied her profile in the dying lamplight, noting the strong line of her jaw, the slight furrow between her brows, that remained even in repose. Not a conventional beauty by any measure, but striking in her severity, with a presence that commanded attention. Whatever game she played, whatever secrets she kept, she was now bound to him as he was to her. The cord that had tied their hands, in ceremony, might have been temporary, but the oath behind it was not. For better or worse, their fates were now interwoven. Ragnar turned away, facing the wall as he finally surrendered to exhaustion. His last conscious thought was a silent prayer to Odin for wisdom to understand the mysterious woman who now shared his name, his hall, and his uncertain future. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity that follows celebration, the great hall strewn with the evidence of the previous night's feast, emptied horns, gnawed bones, and sleeping figures who had found the journey home too arduous. Ragnar woke alone, the space beside him on the bed empty and cold. He dressed quickly, immediately alert despite the short night's rest. He found Freydis already in the main hall, directing servants in the cleanup with quiet efficiency. She had exchanged her ceremonial clothes for a simple wool dress of dark blue, belted at the waist with a leather strap from which hung a small knife and a set of household keys, the traditional symbols of the mistress of the hall. Her dark hair was braided simply down her back, practical rather than ornamental. She looked up as he approached, acknowledging him with a slight nod. "Husband, I hope you rested well." "Well enough," he replied, studying her in the morning light. Without mud or finery to distract, he could better assess the woman he had married. She moved with the precise economy of someone trained in physical disciplines, wasting no gesture, constantly aware of her surroundings. Her hands, he noticed, bore calluses inconsistent with typical women's work, not the marks of spindle and loom, but something rougher. "Your men drink impressively," she observed, gesturing to several of his warriors who still slumbered near the hearth. "Even my father's berserkers are impressed." "Your father's men are still here?" Ragnar asked sharply. "They depart after breaking." "They're fast," Fridas replied. "My father himself left at dawn. Some urgent business called him back to his own holdings. He left a gift for us there." She nodded toward a large object near the high seat, covered with a cloth. Ragnar approached it cautiously. Among their people, gifts could be genuine tokens of goodwill or subtle insults, depending on their nature. He pulled away the covering to reveal a finely crafted wooden chest, its lid and sides carved with intricate scenes of Norse mythology. Odin hanging from Yggdrasil, Thor battling the Midgard serpent, Freya in her feather cloak. "It contains my dowry," Fridas explained, coming to stand beside him. Though not the traditional kind. Ragnar opened the chest, expecting jewelry, silver, or fine textiles, the usual wealth a bride brought to her marriage. Instead, he found himself staring at weapons. A sword of exceptional quality lay across the top, its hilt wrapped in blue leather, inlaid with silver wire in patterns that matched the arm rings marking a jarl's status. Beneath it, nestled in oiled cloth, were a shield boss of polished bronze, the head of a war axe that gleamed with lethal sharpness, and several smaller knives designed for fighting rather than household use. "This is a warrior's treasury," Ragnar said, looking up at her in confusion. "Not a bride's dowry." "It is both," Fridas replied simply. "As am I." Before she could explain further, the doors to the hall burst open, admitting Bjorn, his expression urgent. "Ragnar, ships approaching from the north. 3 longships with red-striped sails." Ragnar tensed immediately. "Eirik Redax," he muttered, recognizing the description. Eirik was a notorious raider known for striking settlements when they were vulnerable, and Ravnfjord, depleted after Ragnar's disastrous expedition and distracted by wedding celebrations, presented an inviting target. "How long?" he demanded, already moving toward the door. "Less than an hour before they make landfall," Bjorn reported. "They're riding the morning tide." Ragnar began shouting orders, rousing his sleeping warriors and sending runners to alert the settlement. "Arm yourselves! Get the women and children to the forest cave! Halfdan, see to the defense of the northern approach." As chaos erupted around them, Ragnar turned back to find Fridas standing calmly beside the open chest of weapons, watching him with an unreadable expression. "Go with the other women," he ordered. "Astrid will show you to the cave." Fridas made no move to obey. Instead, she reached down and lifted the sword from her dowry chest, testing its weight and balance with the practiced eye of someone intimately familiar with such weapons. "I am not like other women, Ragnar Ironhand," she said, her voice steady as she met his gaze. "And you need every sword arm available if Eirik Redax comes with 3 ships of raiders." Before Ragnar could respond, she turned and walked toward the women's quarters, the sword still in her hand, leaving him staring after her in confusion and growing suspicion. Who had he truly married, and what role would she play in the battle that approached with the morning tide? The settlement of Ravnfjord erupted into controlled chaos as warriors grabbed weapons and families gathered essential belongings. Ragnar strode through the commotion, shouting orders and organizing defense points around the vulnerable harbor. His mind raced with calculations of their strength. He had 25 capable warriors, plus another dozen men from the village who could wield weapons if pressed. Against Eirik Redax's 3 ships, carrying perhaps 70 hardened raiders, the odds were grim. "Halfdan," Ragnar called, spotting his trusted friend directing men to defensive positions. What of our ship? Beached and secure, Halfdan replied grimly. No time to prepare it for battle now. Ragnar nodded, his expression hardening. Then, we make our stand on land, position archers on the slope above the landing beach. We'll funnel them through the narrow path between the rocks. As men rushed to follow his commands, Ragnar felt a presence at his shoulder. He turned to find Bjorn, face taut with concern. The women and children? Ragnar asked, moving to the cave. His brother confirmed. But Ragnar, there's something else. 2 of Sigurd's warriors remained behind when he left. They're offering to fight alongside us. Ragnar's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would Sigurd's men willingly join our battle? The blood debt is paid. They say they serve your wife, not Sigurd. That their loyalty is to Freydis first. This unexpected development added another layer to the mystery surrounding his new bride. What kind of Jarl's daughter commanded the personal loyalty of hardened warriors? Except their swords, Ragnar decided, after a moment's consideration. But watch them closely. This may be some new deception. Bjorn nodded and hurried away to relay the orders. Ragnar turned toward the women's quarters, intending to ensure Freydis had joined the other women in seeking safety. Instead, he found himself facing a warrior in light leather armor, a shield strapped to one arm, sword hanging at the hip. It took him a heartbeat to recognize his wife. Freydis had bound her dark hair tightly against her head, practical for battle. She wore a leather cuirass over a simple wool tunic, reinforced with small metal plates across vital areas. Leather bracers protected her forearms, and a belt of throwing knives crossed her chest. She looked nothing like the mud-covered creature who had first arrived, nor the elegant bride of the previous evening. This Freydis stood as a warrior prepared for combat. What game is this? Ragnar demanded, anger flaring at this new transformation. No game, husband, she replied calmly, adjusting the shield strap on her arm. Eric Redax will not discriminate between men and women when he raids your settlement. I choose to meet him with steel rather than screams. You're a woman, Ragnar stated flatly, as though she might have forgotten this fundamental fact. Freydis's dark eyes flashed. I am a shield maiden, trained since childhood in the arts of war. Those scars you glimpsed last night, earned in battles across the Baltic Sea and the Frankish shores. My father did not hide me away out of shame for my ugliness, Ragnar Ironhand. He kept me from sight because a daughter who chooses the path of shield and sword rather than loom and hearth is not easily marriageable. The revelation struck Ragnar like a physical blow. Shield maidens were rare but not unknown in Norse society, women who set aside traditional roles to train alongside men, fighting in raids and defending settlements. They were respected, but often viewed with suspicion, seen as existing outside, the normal boundaries that defined men's and women's separate spheres. You deceived me, he accused. I revealed only what you were prepared to see, she countered. Yesterday, you could not have accepted this truth. Perhaps even now you cannot. But Eirik's raiders approach, and every sword arm will be needed if your people are to survive. She gestured toward the harbor, where the enemy ships were now visible on the horizon, their red-striped sails clearly identifiable. Before Ragnar could respond, Halfdan approached at a run. Ragnar, Eirik's ships have changed course. They're heading for the northern beach, not the main harbor. He knows our defenses, Ragnar realized, immediately grasping the tactical shift. He's landing where the approach to the settlement is less guarded. The path through the ash grove, Freydis said immediately, displaying knowledge of the local terrain that surprised Ragnar. It provides cover all the way to the rear of the settlement. Your men are positioned to defend the harbor approach, leaving your flank exposed. Ragnar glanced sharply at her, unsettled by her military assessment but unable to fault its accuracy. How do you know our terrain so well? I studied maps of Ravnfjord for weeks before our marriage, she replied matter-of-factly. Knowledge is a weapon, Ragnar, one I never willingly surrender. The implications of her preparation, that she had researched his home thoroughly before their arranged marriage, would need to be addressed later. For now, the tactical problem demanded his full attention. Halfdan, take 10 men and circle behind to defend the Ashgrove approach, Ragnar ordered. Bjorn, keep the remaining warriors in position at the harbor. Eirik may be attempting to split our forces before landing his main party there. Halfdan hesitated, looking uncertainly between Ragnar and Freydis. And your wife? The question hung in the air between them, forcing an immediate decision. Ragnar studied Freydis, seeing now what he had missed before: the warrior's stance, the calloused hands accustomed to weapons, the calculating assessment in her eyes as she gauged the approaching threat. Whether he approved or not, she was clearly trained for battle. She stays with me, Ragnar decided, earning a brief look of surprise from Freydis. We'll take position at the ridge overlooking both approaches. From there, we can reinforce whichever point faces the greater threat. Halfdan nodded and rushed to gather his assigned men. Ragnar turned back to Freydis, his expression stern. If you fight alongside my warriors, you follow my commands without question. I'll not have chaos in battle because a shield maiden thinks herself above a chieftain's orders. I didn't disguise myself as a warrior to disobey tactical commands, Freydis replied with unexpected humility. In battle, there must be one leader. Today, that is you. Satisfied with her response, if still unsettled by her presence, Ragnar led the way toward the ridge that offered the best vantage point of both potential landing sites. They moved swiftly through the settlement, past villagers hurrying toward safety and warriors taking up defensive positions. One of Sigurd's men, a massive, red-bearded warrior named Gunnar, fell into step beside Freydis. The lady fights. Today, he stated, rather than asked, showing no surprise at her battle-ready appearance. As always, Gunnar, she replied with familiar ease. Where is Ulfar? Positioned with the archers. His eyes remained sharp. Ragnar listened to this exchange with growing curiosity. The casual way they spoke of battle, the easy camaraderie. This was not a noblewoman play-acting at war, but a commander, conversing with a trusted warrior. The mystery of Freydis deepened with each revelation. They reached the ridge in time to see Eric's strategy unfold. 2 ships were indeed approaching the northern beach, while the third maintained course for the main harbor. A classic pincer movement, designed to divide defenders and create confusion. He's done this before, Ragnar observed grimly. Split his forces to attack from multiple directions. 3 summers ago, at Hedeby, Freydis confirmed. Eirik razed half the settlement before they could organize their defense. He'll expect you to panic and divide your strength evenly, leaving both points vulnerable. Ragnar turned to her sharply. You've faced him? A grim smile touched her lips. My father's lands lie north of here. We've repelled Eric's raids twice. The second time, he left with fewer men than he arrived with. This practical knowledge of their enemy shifted Ragnar's perception further. Whatever else Freydis might be, she was clearly experienced in warfare. What would you advise? He asked, the question emerging before he could consider its implications. If his unexpected deference surprised her, Freydis gave no sign. She studied the approaching ships with narrowed eyes. Eirik expects division. Give him concentration instead. The northern beach is difficult to land on. Rocky, with a steep approach. His men will be vulnerable as they disembark. Strike there with your main force, hard and fast. Leave only enough defenders at the harbor to slow the third ship. If we break the northern force quickly, we can return to reinforce the harbor before they penetrate the settlement's defenses. It was sound strategy, aggressive rather than defensive, using the terrain to maximum advantage. Exactly what Ragnar himself might have proposed, had he not been distracted by the revelation of his wife's true nature. Halfdan is already heading north with 10 men, Ragnar said, making his decision. We'll join him with 5 more. Bjorn can hold the harbor approach with the remainder. He turned, bellowing orders to the nearest warriors, who immediately began regrouping according to his command. As they prepared to move out, Ragnar found himself studying Freydis with new eyes. The mud-covered creature and the elegant bride had both been disguises, masks worn for a specific purpose. This, he suspected, was the true Freydis, a warrior woman who had trained alongside men, who knew battle strategy and had faced raiders before. "Why the deception?" he asked as they began the descent toward the northern beach, their warriors following behind. "Why present yourself first as a troll woman if this is your true nature?" Freydis kept her eyes on the path ahead, her stride matching his own. "Would you have accepted a shield maiden as payment for a blood debt? A woman who defies the natural order, who chooses sword over spindle? Or would you have seen it as further? Insult from Sigurd, offering damaged goods in payment for his sons' lives?" The harsh assessment struck uncomfortably close to truth. Ragnar had been raised with traditional views of a woman's proper place and role. While shield maidens existed in Norse society, they were rare exceptions, often viewed with a mixture of respect and discomfort. "You misjudged me," he said, though without complete conviction. "Did I?" Freydis glanced at him briefly. "When you believed me hideous, you saw me as a burden, but one you would bear honorably for the sake of your people. What would you have seen if I had arrived as I am now?" Before Ragnar could formulate a response, a horn blast cut through the air, the signal that Eric's ships had begun landing their warriors. The time for conversation had ended. Now would come the test of steel and courage, with his people's lives hanging in the balance. And beside him, a wife he hardly knew prepared to fight for a settlement that was not her own, for people who had expected to mock her as a troll bride, against raiders who would show no mercy to any who stood in their path. The battle for Ravnfjord had begun. The northern beach came into view as Ragnar and Freydis crested the final rise, their warriors close. Below, the first of Eric's ships had landed, its bow scraping onto the rocky shore. Warriors poured from its sides, splashing through the shallows, shields raised and weapons at the ready. The second ship circled just offshore, its crew clearly, waiting for the first wave to secure a foothold before attempting their own landing. Halfdan had positioned his men skillfully, using the natural choke point where the beach narrowed between two rocky outcroppings. Already, the first clash of steel on steel rang across the strand as raiders met defenders. "They outnumber Halfdan's group," Ragnar observed. "We need to hit their flank before they push through." Freydis nodded, her dark eyes calculating distances and angles of approach. "There!" She pointed to a narrow path that descended from their position to the raiders' right side. "That approach keeps us hidden until the last moment. We can strike, while they're focused on Halfdan's frontal defense." It was exactly the opportunity Ragnar had spotted himself. Without further discussion, he led their group down the path, moving quickly but carefully over the uneven ground. The sounds of battle intensified, shouts of men, the clash of weapons, occasionally the sharp cry of the wounded. At the bottom of the path, Ragnar raised his hand, halting their group while he assessed the situation. Approximately 30 raiders had made it ashore, engaged in fierce combat with Halfdan's defenders, who were giving ground slowly but steadily. The numerical advantage was telling. Ragnar drew his sword, the familiar weight comforting in his hand. Beside him, Freydis unsheathed her own blade, the finely crafted weapon from her dowry chest that he had assumed was merely ceremonial. Now, seeing her grip and stance, he realized it was a sword well used, perfectly balanced for her height and fighting style. "For Ravnfjord!" Ragnar bellowed the battle cry and charged from concealment, his warriors surging behind him. The raiders, caught by surprise, turned too late to meet this new threat. Ragnar crashed into their flank like a wave against rocks, his sword finding gaps in their hasty defense. Two fell immediately, a third staggering back with a deep gash across his shield arm. Around him, his warriors pushed the advantage of surprise, driving a wedge into the raiders' formation, and then Freydis was beside him, moving with a fluid grace that belied her deadly purpose. Her sword flashed in the morning light, her shield positioned perfectly to deflect incoming blows. She fought with economy and precision. No movement wasted, no dramatic flourishes that might leave her vulnerable. A raider lunged at her, clearly, seeing a woman as an easier target. His mistake proved fatal as Fridas sidestepped his thrust, her blade opening his throat in a single smooth motion. The shock of the flank attack, combined with Halfdan's renewed pressure from the front, broke the raiders' cohesion. Some began retreating toward their ship, while others formed a defensive circle, fighting desperately against attackers now coming from two directions. Eric himself was not among this group, Ragnar noted, the notorious raider likely commanding the ship heading for the main harbor. These were merely his advance force, sent to divide Ravenfjord's defenses. A shout from the water drew Ragnar's attention. The second ship had begun its approach, warriors lined along its sides ready to leap into the shallows and reinforce their comrades. If they landed successfully, the numerical advantage would shift decisively against Ravenfjord's defenders. "The second ship," Ragnar called to Halfdan, who nodded understanding and began directing archers to target the approaching vessel. Fridas disengaged from her current opponent, leaving him clutching a wounded arm, and quickly assessed the new threat. "We need to clear the beach before they land," she called to Ragnar. "Push them back into the water." She was right. Their best chance was to defeat the first group decisively before reinforcements arrived. Ragnar rallied his warriors, directing them to focus their attack on the raiders closest to the water's edge, driving a wedge between the landing party and their potential escape route. The fighting intensified, desperation lending strength to the raiders' arms as they realized their position. A burly warrior with a massive axe charged Ragnar, swinging wildly. Ragnar parried the first blow with his shield, the impact numbing his arm, then countered with a thrust that the raider barely avoided. From the corner of his eye, Ragnar saw Fridas engaged with two opponents simultaneously, her shield and sword moving in perfect coordination as she held them at bay. One feinted left while the other rushed her right side, a coordinated attack that would have overwhelmed a lesser fighter. But Fridas dropped to one knee, letting the attacker's momentum carry him forward as she drove her sword up into his unprotected abdomen. In the same motion, she spun to block the second attacker's sword with her shield. The display of skill momentarily distracted Ragnar, nearly costing him dearly as the axe wielder pressed his attack. A desperate parry turned the axe head just enough that it slid past Ragnar's guard, scoring a shallow cut along his ribs rather than cleaving his chest. Grunting with pain, Ragnar countered, his sword finding the gap where the raider's helmet met his mail shirt. The man collapsed, blood spurting from his neck. Across the beach, the tide of battle was turning. Halfdan's men had pushed forward, hemming the raiders against the water's edge. Those still standing faced a grim choice: surrender, death in battle, or retreat into the cold embrace of the sea. Some chose the latter, splashing toward their ship in desperation. The vessel's crew extended oars and spears, helping their comrades climb aboard. Others threw down their weapons, raising empty hands in the universal gesture of surrender. A few fought on, determined to reach Valhalla with sword in hand. The second ship, seeing the defeat of the first landing party, abruptly changed course, veering away from the beach toward open water. They would not risk the same fate as their comrades. "Victory on this front," Halfdan called, blood streaming from a cut above his eye but his voice strong. "But what of the harbor?" As if in answer, a horn blew from the direction of the settlement. 3 short blasts, followed by one long note, the signal for immediate reinforcement. "Bjorn is hard-pressed," Ragnar interpreted grimly. "Secure the prisoners and tend the wounded. Every warrior still capable of fighting, with me to the harbor." 20 men, Ragnar included, began the rapid ascent back toward the settlement, leaving Halfdan to organize the aftermath of their victory on the northern beach. As they ran, Ragnar glanced at Freydis, who kept pace easily despite the exertion of battle. Blood spattered her leather armor and smeared one cheek, but none of it appeared to be her own. "You fight well," he acknowledged grudgingly. As do you, she replied, not breaking stride. Though you leave your right side exposed when you swing. That cut on your ribs could have been avoided. The criticism, delivered matter-of-factly rather, than with mockery, still stung his pride. And you drop your shield point when backing away from an opponent. A fleeting smile touched her lips. My old swordmaster said the same. Some habits prove difficult to break. The casual reference to formal weapons training, something typically reserved for noble sons, not daughters, was another piece of the puzzle that was Fridas. They reached the crest overlooking the main settlement and harbor, and the situation below immediately demanded their full attention. Eirik's largest ship had landed successfully, disgorging at least 40 warriors who now pushed steadily through Ravenfjord's defenses. Bjorn and his men had formed a defensive line at the edge of the main settlement, fighting desperately to prevent the raiders from reaching the vulnerable buildings and those who had sought shelter within. At the head of the raiding party strode a massive figure instantly recognizable even at a distance. Eirik Redax himself, his famous weapon gleaming dully as he swung it in devastating arcs. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with flame red hair and beard, Eirik was a formidable opponent whose reputation for brutality was well earned. Eirik leads from the front, Fridas observed. Cut off the head, and the body will falter. Ragnar studied the battlefield, noting the positions of their defenders and the raiders' advance. We'll descend along the eastern path. That puts us behind them. While Bjorn holds their attention from the front, we can strike their rear and drive directly for Eirik. They moved quickly, leading their warriors down the steep path that would position them for maximum surprise. As they approached the battle, Ragnar noted with pride that his brother had organized the defense well, using the natural terrain to funnel attackers into a narrow front, where their superior numbers provided less advantage. But Eirik was no fool. The notorious raider had recognized the tactical situation and was methodically working to flank Bjorn's position, sending warriors to circle around the buildings at the settlement's edge. They're attempting to surround Bjorn, Fridas said, echoing Ragnar's assessment. We need to move now, before they complete the maneuver. Ragnar nodded grimly. On my signal. He raised his sword, waiting until his warriors had formed a tight wedge behind him, then brought the blade down with a sharp chopping motion. As one, they surged forward, no battle cry this time. Silence would maintain their advantage of surprise a few moments longer. They were halfway to the raiders' rear position when they were spotted. A shout went up, causing several of Eirik's men to turn, but too late to properly organize a defense. Ragnar's group slammed into them from behind, shattering their formation and driving through toward the center where Eirik commanded. The massive raider leader turned at the commotion, his face darkening with rage as he recognized a flanking attack. To me! He bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield as he rallied his nearest warriors. The fighting intensified, with Eirik's men now caught between Bjorn's defensive line and Ragnar's attacking force. Confusion spread through their ranks. As they attempted to face enemies on 2 fronts, Ragnar cut his way forward, determined to reach Eirik himself. Beside him, Fridas matched his pace, her sword clearing a path with efficient precision. A particularly skilled raider, clearly one of Eirik's lieutenants, moved to intercept them, his spear thrusting toward Ragnar's chest. Fridas's shield knocked the spear point aside, creating the opening Ragnar needed to close distance and deliver a killing blow. The seamless coordination surprised Ragnar. They had never trained together, never discussed fighting techniques, yet moved as partners, who had battled side by side for years. There was no time to consider this phenomenon, however, as they pushed ever closer to Eirik himself. The notorious raider had recognized the threat. Rather than continuing to press Bjorn's line, he turned to face Ragnar's approach, his massive axe held ready. Around him, a circle of his best warriors formed a protective ring, a final defense against the increasingly likely defeat of his raiding party. Ragnar Ironhand! Eirik called, his voice carrying over the clash of battle. I came seeking easy plunder from a weakened settlement. Instead, I find the wolf still has teeth." "More than teeth," Ragnar replied, indicating the raiders already, retreating toward their ship. "Your advance party lies dead or captured on the northern beach. Your warriors here are caught between two forces. Surrender now, Eric Redax, and you may yet leave these shores alive." Eric threw back his head and laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine mirth. "Surrender is for thralls and women, not for warriors bound for Valhalla." His gaze shifted to Freydis, standing battle-ready at Ragnar's side. "Though I see you bring a woman to do a man's fighting for you, has the great Ironhand fallen so low?" Before Ragnar could respond, Freydis stepped forward, her sword pointing directly at Eric. "I am Freydis Shield Maiden, daughter of Sigurd One-Eye and wife to Ragnar Ironhand. My sword has tasted the blood of better warriors than you, Eric Redax, and found it thin and watery." A ripple of reaction passed through the warriors on both sides. Surprise from Ragnar's men who had not yet witnessed Freydis in battle, and mocking laughter from Eirik's followers. Eric himself seemed more intrigued than insulted. "Sigurd's hidden daughter. I've heard tales of a she-wolf who fights at his side in northern raids. So he's married you off to Ironhand." His eyes narrowed as he assessed her. "Your reputation claims you've sent a dozen men to hell with that blade. The count now stands at 14. Freydis replied coldly, "with more to be added before this day ends." The exchange gave Ragnar crucial moments to signal Bjorn, who had pushed forward with his men during the distraction. Now, Eric's protective circle found itself compressed from multiple sides, the noose tightening around the raider leader. Recognizing his deteriorating position, Eric made his decision. With a roar that seemed to shake the very air, he charged directly at Ragnar, his massive axe sweeping in a horizontal arc that would cleave through shield and man alike if it connected. Ragnar lunged backward, the axe passing a hair's breadth from his chest. Before he could counter, Eirik had reversed his swing, the weapon's momentum carrying it in a deadly circle. This time, Ragnar caught the blow on his shield, the impact driving him to one knee as wood splintered under the force. Eirik raised the axe for a killing blow, but Freydis darted forward, her sword slashing toward his exposed right side. The raider twisted with surprising agility for one so large, avoiding the worst of the cut, but still taking a gash along his ribs. He snarled in pain and anger, swinging his axe toward this new threat. Freydis ducked under the wild swing, rolling forward to slash at Eirik's leg as she passed. Blood flowed from the wound, but the massive warrior seemed hardly to notice, his battle rage carrying him forward as he pursued Freydis with relentless fury. This single combat had become the focal point of the battle, warriors on both sides, forming a rough circle around the trio as Ragnar regained his feet and Eirik continued his assault on Freydis. The Shield Maiden gave ground strategically, keeping just beyond the axe's reach, drawing Eirik further from his protective circle of warriors. Ragnar recognized her tactic immediately. She was creating space for him to attack from behind, while Eirik focused on her. It was a fighting strategy that required absolute trust between partners, each dependent on the other's timing and skill for survival. Without hesitation, Ragnar circled wide, positioning himself behind the distracted raider. Eirik, consumed, with rage at being wounded by a woman, had narrowed his focus to Freydis alone, leaving his back exposed. Freydis saw Ragnar's approach over Eirik's shoulder. In a final provocation, she lowered her sword slightly, creating the illusion of fatigue or weakness. The raider lunged forward, axe raised for a killing blow. In that moment of commitment, when Eirik's balance was forward and his guard open, Ragnar struck. His sword drove deep between the raider's shoulder blades, finding the gap in his armor where flexibility was prioritized over protection. Eirik stiffened, a look of shock replacing rage on his broad features. The axe fell from nerveless fingers as he dropped to his knees, blood bubbling from his lips as he tried to speak. His eyes found Freydis, standing calmly before him, sword still ready. "A woman," he managed, disbelief evident even as life faded from his eyes. "And a man," Fridas corrected, glancing at Ragnar. "Working as one." Eric toppled forward, face striking the earth in final defeat. A stunned silence fell over the battlefield as both sides processed the fall of the notorious raider leader. Then, as if a spell had broken, Eric's remaining warriors began throwing down their weapons, seeing their cause lost with their leader's death. Bjorn's men moved forward to secure prisoners, while others began pursuing those attempting to flee back to their ship. Ragnar stood over Eric's body, adrenaline still coursing through his veins as he processed what had just occurred. The raid had been repelled, his people saved, and the notorious Eric Redax, scourge of coastal settlements from Hedeby to the Scottish Isles, lay dead at his feet, and beside him stood Freydis, bloodied but unbowed, the shield maiden who had arrived disguised as a troll woman and now stood revealed as a warrior whose skill and courage had helped turn the tide of battle. Their eyes met over Eric's fallen form, a moment of silent acknowledgement passing between them. Whatever deceptions had brought them to this point, whatever mysteries still surrounded his new wife, one truth now stood undeniable. In battle, at least, they were perfectly matched. The aftermath of battle brought its own chaos, wounded to tend, prisoners to secure, damage to assess. Smoke rose from a storage building at the edge of the settlement where raiders had managed to set fire before being driven back. Villagers emerged cautiously from hiding, relief evident in their faces as they realized the threat had passed. Ragnar stood in the center of it all, issuing orders with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned commander. Warriors dragged Eric's body to the shore where his surviving men could witness their leader's fate. The remaining raiders, those who hadn't escaped to their ship, knelt in defeated rows, hands bound, futures uncertain. Through it all, Freydis worked alongside Ravenfjord's people, her earlier battle ferocity replaced by practical focus. She moved among the wounded, applying field dressings with skilled hands, directing those with more serious injuries to the settlement's healer. Villagers who had expected to mock her as a troll bride now watched with confused respect as the warrior's blood stained her already soiled armor. 13 dead, 22 wounded, 4 severely, Halfdan reported, approaching Ragnar with a grim expression. Blood had dried in his beard, and he favored his left leg where a raider's blade had found its mark. No women or children harmed. They remained secure in the cave. "And the raiders?" Ragnar asked, wiping his sword clean before sheathing it. 27 dead, including Eric. 19 captured. The rest escaped on the ship that managed to pull away. Halfdan's gaze shifted to Freydis, who knelt beside a wounded warrior, pressing a cloth against his bleeding shoulder. "Your wife fought like one of the Valkyries themselves. Had you known?" The question hung between them. Had Ragnar known what manner of woman he had married? The truth was both simpler and more complex than his friend could imagine. "No," Ragnar admitted. "She revealed herself only when the raiders were sighted." He paused, watching as Freydis efficiently bandaged the wound before moving to the next injured man. "Though I suspect her father knew precisely what he was doing when he arranged our marriage." Halfdan nodded thoughtfully. "A shield maiden as payment for a blood debt. Unusual, but perhaps fitting. Your enemies will think twice about attacking Ravenfjord when word spreads that Sigurd One-Eye's warrior daughter now stands at your side." The political advantage had not occurred to Ragnar until that moment. His marriage to Freydis, initially seen as a humiliation, now appeared in a different light. Sigurd had not merely offloaded an unmarriageable daughter, he had formed a powerful alliance, bolstering Ragnar's weakened position with a warrior of considerable skill and the implied support of her father's formidable forces. "Gather the prisoners near the Great Hall," Ragnar instructed, his mind already turning to what must come next. "We'll decide their fates before sunset." As Halfdan moved to comply, Ragnar crossed to where Freydis worked. She looked up at his Approach, her face smudged with dirt and blood, dark eyes assessing his condition. "You're wounded," she observed, nodding toward the cut along his ribs that had begun seeping blood through his tunic. "It's shallow," Ragnar replied dismissively. "Others need attention more urgently." Fridas rose, wiping her hands on a relatively clean portion of her leather armor. A chieftain who neglects his own wounds risks infection that could cripple the entire settlement. "Sit." She gestured to a nearby bench with the same air of command she had displayed in battle. Surprisingly, Ragnar found himself complying without argument. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of combat, or simply recognition that she spoke sense. He removed his tunic, revealing the long, shallow cut that traced his right side where the raider's axe had found momentary purchase. Fridas examined the wound with clinical detachment, her fingers probing the edges gently but firmly. "Clean cut. It needs stitching to prevent scarring, but can wait until we've returned to the hall." She bound it temporarily with a strip of cloth torn from a fallen raider's tunic, her movements efficient and practiced. "You've done this before," Ragnar observed. It wasn't a question. "Many times," Freydis confirmed, securing the bandage. "A shield maiden learns to mend the wounds she helps create. On the battlefield, those skills often make the difference between life and death." As she worked, Ragnar studied her face, the strong lines and determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her dark eyes. Without mud or pretense to mask her features, he could see that while she might not possess conventional beauty, there was a compelling strength in her countenance that commanded attention. "Why the deception?" he asked again, the question that had burned since her transformation at their wedding. "Why present yourself as hideous when you could have come as this?" He gestured to encompass her current appearance, bloodied but unbowed, a warrior worthy of respect. Fridas finished securing the bandage before answering. "What value would you have placed on a shield maiden bride, Ragnar Ironhand? What price would you have set on a woman who defies the natural order? Would you have seen me as payment enough for the lives of Sigurd's sons?" The directness of her question gave Ragnar pause. Before today, he would likely have considered a warrior woman an insult rather than compensation, an oddity to be tolerated rather than a partner to be valued. "You wanted me to see you at your worst," he realized, "so that anything better would seem an improvement." A small smile touched her lips. "Not my worst. Merely a disguise. I needed to know what manner of man I was binding myself to. Would you reject me outright? Accept me with resentment but honor your oath? Or would you look beyond appearance to see the person beneath?" She shrugged slightly. "Your reaction told me much about your character." "And what did it tell you?" Ragnar asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. "That you are honorable, but proud. That you place your people's needs above your own desires. That you can be manipulated through that very honor." Her expression softened slightly. "But also that you possess a core of decency that many men in your position would lack. You did not mock or mistreat me, even when you believed me repulsive." The frank evaluation left Ragnar momentarily speechless. Before he could formulate a response, Bjorn approached, his expression urgent. "The prisoners are gathered," he reported. "And there's something else. A ship approaching from the east. Not raiders," he added quickly, seeing Ragnar tense. "It flies Sigurd One-Eye's banner." Fridas and Ragnar exchanged a look of mutual surprise. "My father was returning to his own lands," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "He should be far north by now." "Perhaps he never truly left," Ragnar suggested, suspicion darkening his tone. "Perhaps he lingered offshore, waiting to see how Ravenfjord fared against Eric's raiders." Understanding dawned in Fridas's eyes. "You think this was a test?" "I think nothing would happen in these waters without Sigurd One-Eye's knowledge," Ragnar replied grimly, rising from the bench. "And I find it curious that raiders attacked the day after our wedding, when his men were still present in our settlement." They moved together toward the shore, where villagers had already spotted the approaching vessel. A magnificent longship with an intricately carved dragon head and sail emblazoned with Sigurd's personal sigil. It approached slowly, clearly, signaling peaceful intent. If my father arranged this attack to test us, he would have ensured Eric posed no true threat to the settlement, Fridas said quietly as they walked. The raid would have been calculated, dangerous enough to require a genuine defense, but with safeguards to prevent complete destruction. You speak as though this would not surprise you, Ragnar observed. Fridas met his gaze directly. My father has tested every prospective ally in similar fashion. It is his way of measuring their worth before committing his full support. So, our marriage was merely the first step, Ragnar concluded. The true alliance would depend on how we fared. Against Eirik, how we fared together, Fridas corrected. A test of our combined strength, not yours alone. They reached the harbor as Sigurd's ship docked. The massive Jarl himself stood at the prow, his single eye surveying the aftermath of battle, visible throughout the settlement. When his gaze found Ragnar and Fridas, both bloodied from combat but standing tall, a smile of satisfaction spread beneath his gray-streaked beard. Ragnar Ironhand, he called, his voice carrying across the water. I see you've discovered the true nature of my gift. Beside Ragnar, Fridas tensed almost imperceptibly. The public acknowledgement of her warrior status, by her father no less, clearly surprised her. Sigurd disembarked with the fluid grace of a man half his age, striding toward them with arms spread wide. And together you've sent Eirik Radax to the arms of hell, a fitting wedding celebration. Ragnar stepped forward, meeting Sigurd halfway. You knew Eirik would attack. It wasn't a question, but Sigurd answered nonetheless. I knew he circled these waters like a hungry wolf, watching for weakness. Your disastrous raid and subsequent wedding presented an opportunity he could not resist. The Jarl's single eye gleamed with cunning. Just as you could not resist the challenge of discovering my daughter's true worth. You risked our lives and the safety of my people for a test? Ragnar's voice was dangerously quiet. I risked nothing that wasn't already in danger, Sigurd countered. Eirik would have attacked whether I anticipated it or not. I merely ensured you had the weapon needed to defeat him. He gestured toward Fridas, who had moved to stand at Ragnar's shoulder. I am not a weapon, father, she said coldly, nor a gift to be bestowed. Sigurd laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. No, daughter, you are not. You are a shield maiden, a warrior born, too valuable to waste on an unworthy husband. His gaze shifted to Ragnar. I needed to know if this man could see beyond convention and tradition to recognize your true value. If he could fight beside you as an equal rather than bristle at a woman's skill with blade and shield. So the blood debt, the arranged marriage, all of it was manipulation, Ragnar concluded. The debt was real, Sigurd corrected. My sons died by your blade, even if by accident, but I could have demanded gold or land as compensation. Instead, I chose an alliance sealed with marriage, specifically marriage to my greatest warrior. He clasped Ragnar's shoulder with a meaty hand. And now Eirik Radax lies dead, your settlement stands unburned, and the first true test of that alliance has been passed with blood and honor. Despite his lingering anger at being manipulated, Ragnar could not deny the strategic brilliance of Sigurd's scheme. The older Jarl had transformed a potential blood feud into a powerful alliance, using Eirik's predictable opportunism as the forge to strengthen the newly formed bond. Come, Sigurd said, gesturing toward the great hall. We have prisoners to judge, wounds to bind, and a victory to celebrate. The saga-tellers will speak of this day for generations, how Ragnar Ironhand and Fridas Shieldmaiden stood together against the Red Axe and prevailed. As they walked toward the hall, villagers and warriors alike parted before them, bowing respectfully to Sigurd, but watching Fridas with newfound awe. The murmured conversations that followed in their wake spoke not of the troll bride or the Jarl's hideous daughter, but of the warrior woman who had fought with the skill of a Valkyrie to defend her new home. Inside the great hall, as prisoners were brought forth for judgment and mead was poured to honor the fallen, Ragnar found himself continuously aware of Freydis's presence beside him. She had cleaned the worst of the blood from her face and hands, but still wore her battle-stained leather armor, making no attempt to resume a more conventional feminine appearance, now that her true nature had been revealed. When all the prisoners had been dealt with, some ransomed, others assigned as thralls to replace those lost in Ragnar's disastrous raid months earlier, Sigurd raised his drinking horn in a toast. "To my daughter and her husband," he proclaimed, his voice filling the hall. "May their enemies tremble before their combined strength, and may their names be remembered in the sagas as warriors worthy of Valhalla." A roar of approval went up from the assembled warriors and villagers, their earlier misgivings about the strange bride forgotten in the afterglow of victory. Horns were drained and refilled as the celebration began in earnest, the near disaster of the raid transformed into triumph through the magic of success and strong mead. As the evening progressed, Ragnar found a moment of relative privacy with Freydis, both of them stepping away from the main celebration to catch their breath near one of the side doorways. "You're still angry," she observed, studying his face in the flickering torchlight. "Wouldn't you be?" Ragnar countered. "I was manipulated by your father, deceived by you, tested without my knowledge or consent." Freydis considered this, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I would be angry. But I would also consider what was gained through that manipulation." She gestured toward the hall, where his people celebrated with newfound confidence. "Your position is strengthened. Eric Redax, who might have destroyed Ravenfjord completely, lies dead. And you have gained not just a wife, but a warrior to stand at your side. A wife I don't know," Ragnar pointed out. "A stranger who has shown me at least 3 different faces in as many days." "Then perhaps it's time you learned who I truly am," Freydis said quietly. "Not the mud-covered creature, not the elegant bride, not even just the shield maiden, but all that lies beneath those masks." She held his gaze steadily, offering not submission or apology, but something rarer, an invitation to genuine understanding. Before Ragnar could respond, Gunnar, one of Sigurd's warriors who had remained with Freydis, approached with a small wooden chest. "My lady," he said respectfully, offering the container to Freydis. "Your father thought you might wish for these now." Freydis accepted, the chest with a nod of thanks. Gunnar bowed slightly to both of them before returning to the celebration. "Another surprise?" Ragnar asked warily. "Not a deception this time," Freydis assured him, "but perhaps an explanation." She opened the chest to reveal several carefully folded parchments, along with a small bronze pendant on a leather cord. "My history, written in my own hand. The saga of Freydis Shield Maiden, from the day I first defied my father by picking up a sword instead of a spindle, to the raids where I earned both scars and reputation." She lifted the pendant, a small hammer of Thor, worn smooth from years of handling. "My mother's last gift before she died, birthing the son who would have been my father's heir, had he lived past his first winter." She offered both items to Ragnar, tangible pieces of her true self, freely given. "I will answer any question you ask, husband. The time for masks has ended." Ragnar looked at the offerings, then back to the woman who stood before him. Proud, fierce, complicated, and utterly unlike any bride he could have imagined. The anger that had simmered since her revelation began to fade, replaced by something he could not yet name. "Keep your writings," he said finally. "I would rather hear the saga from your own lips, over time, as trust grows between us." He reached out, not for the pendant, but for her hand, his gesture deliberate and measured. "You have proven your worth as a warrior today, Freydis. Now we must discover if we can be more than allies in battle. Freydis's fingers closed around his, her calloused palm pressing against his own battle-hardened hand. A different kind of challenge, she acknowledged. Perhaps harder than facing Eric's axe. And one we face together, Ragnar replied. Without deception or masks between us. Around them, the celebration continued. Warriors recounting the day's battle with increasingly dramatic flourishes. Villagers expressing gratitude for their deliverance. Sigurd holding court with the easy confidence of a jarl secure in his position and pleased with his schemes. But in that quiet corner of the hall, something new began, not the alliance Sigurd had calculated or the bitter compromise Ragnar had expected, but the first tentative connection between two strong spirits who had found in each other an unexpected match. 6 months later, as winter's grip on Ravensfjord began to loosen, Ragnar stood at the prow of his reconstructed longship, watching the first dawn light touch the waters of the fjord. Behind him, 20 warriors prepared for departure. Not for a raid this time, but a trading journey to the eastern lands where amber and furs would be exchanged for silver and spices. Footsteps approached from behind, familiar in their measured cadence. Freydis joined him at the prow, her dark hair braided simply down her back, a fur-lined cloak around her shoulders against the early morning chill. "The men are ready," she reported. "Halfdan's done a fine job preparing them." Ragnar nodded, pride evident in his expression. In the months since Eric's defeat, Ravensfjord had flourished. The alliance with Sigurd had brought increased trade, greater security, and a new respect from neighboring settlements. The blood debt that had once threatened to destroy Ragnar had instead become the foundation of renewed prosperity. "You're certain you won't join us?" he asked, though he already knew her answer. Freydis smiled, resting one hand almost absently on her midsection, where the first subtle swelling had begun to show beneath her woolen dress. "My battles will be fought here for the next season," she replied. "Though I expect this opponent to prove more challenging than Eric Redax." Ragnar's hand covered hers, feeling the firm roundness that sheltered their child. The warrior's heir conceived not on their wedding night but later, when pretense had fallen away and true partnership had begun to grow between them. "Our son will have the strength of both his parents," Ragnar said with certainty. "Or our daughter," Freydis countered, the familiar argument a comfortable ritual between them now. "Either way, the child of Ragnar Ironhand and Freydis Shield Maiden will have much to live up to." The thought sobered them both momentarily. Their reputations had grown since Eirik's defeat, the story spreading through the Norse lands, how the warrior woman disguised as a hideous bride had revealed her true nature in battle, fighting alongside her husband to defeat the notorious raider. Some versions claimed she had killed Eric single-handedly. Others insisted Ragnar had dealt the death blow. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between, a victory achieved through partnership rather than individual prowess. "I've been thinking," Ragnar said, turning to face her fully, "about your arrival at Ravensfjord, covered in mud and snarling like a wolf." Freydis raised an eyebrow, surprised by this return to their beginning. "What of it?" "You showed me 3 faces, the hideous creature, the elegant bride, the fierce warrior." His hand rose to touch her cheek gently. "But now I see the truth was simpler than I thought." "And what truth is that, husband?" she asked, curiosity evident in her dark eyes. "That you were testing not just my reaction to ugliness, but my ability to see value in what others rejected." His expression softened with rare vulnerability. "You needed to know if I could recognize worth beneath the surface, because your entire life had taught you that men seldom look beyond what their eyes first perceive." Freydis was silent for a moment, caught off guard by his insight. "And what did you learn from the test?" she finally asked. "That true worth is measured not by appearance, but by courage," Ragnar replied, echoing the wisdom he had gained through their unlikely union. "That the gods weave patterns too complex for us to understand until we have lived through their design. From the ship, Halfdan called that all was ready for departure. Ragnar nodded acknowledgement before turning back to Freydis. "Keep Ravenfjord safe in my absence," he said, the words a request rather than a command between equals. "Always," she promised. "And you, return safely to us both." She placed his hand once more on her growing midsection, the gesture more powerful than any elaborate farewell. As Ragnar boarded the ship and the crew pushed away from the dock, he watched Freydis standing tall on the shore, her figure strong and proud against the backdrop of the settlement they now led together. No mud disguised her features now, no deception clouded their understanding. The Shield Maiden had found in him a partner worthy of her strength, and he had found in her a match for both his sword arm and his heart. The currents that had brought them together, blood debt, deception, manipulation, had been transformed, through battle and time, into something neither could have anticipated. A true partnership forged in fire and tempered with hard-won respect. As the ship moved out into the fjord, Ragnar raised his hand in farewell, a gesture Freydis returned with equal dignity. Their story, he knew, would continue to unfold in unexpected ways, each challenge revealing new facets of the complex woman he had married. The Shield Maiden who had once hidden behind mud and snarls, but now stood revealed as his greatest ally and most valued companion. In the sagas told around winter fires for generations to come, the tale of Ragnar Ironhand and his warrior bride would grow and change with each telling. But the core truth would remain, that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised, and the strongest bonds are formed when we see beyond surface appearances to the true warrior within. If you've been captivated by this tale of hidden strength and unexpected alliances, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more epic Viking sagas that reveal the complex hearts of these ancient warriors. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next journey into the world of shield walls, blood oaths, and the unbreakable bonds of honor that defined the Norse way of life. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have recognized the warrior beneath Freydis' disguise?